So last night was a lot of fun in the associate. Last night was one of the better nights I felt because you had national TV, you had Sixers, Nets, and it had that playoff type atmosphere. Too often you get all the players, they're loving each other before the game, after the game. And last night I'm watching, it feels like those teams hate each other, and I love it. Joining us here is ESPN NBA front office insider Bobby Marks. Appreciate you making the time here for us. You're always real good to us here, Bobby. Would you agree last night, I like the change of pace every now and then. Give me a couple teams that let it be known, hey, you don't like us, we don't like you. I enjoyed that last night.
It's funny. Tim Bontemps, one of our writers, was texting me during the beginning part of that game, and he's like, "Man, this is living up to everything we thought it would be." And I said, "Tim, I'm watching Indiana Orlando right now." And yeah, it did. You'd love to have Durant out there with that, and Nick Claxton, Joel Embiid, the Harden dynamic. I'm concerned about Ben Simmons, though. I really am, and I think we're almost at this point where we have to accept kind of Ben Simmons, kind of who he is, right? Like he's a role player, right? Role players don't usually play at the end of games.
No field goal attempts at halftime.
No, and his usage rate is like at 14%, which when he was in Philly, it was in the low 20s here, and it notices that he doesn't want the ball in his hands. Everything that comes off the rim is a quick pass. Everything that on offense, it's a quick pass. That's a concern for me. And we'll see how we still have 4 or 5 months before we get to the playoffs. We'll see how it plays out. And if he's one of their guys, yeah, he'll play in the playoffs, but is he one of those guys who'll be on this closing unit, right? Like, and that's a concern if I'm Brooklyn as far as Ben Simmons.
Yes, but overall, I enjoyed last night.
Oh, it was great.
Yeah, I
Terrific.
enjoyed it. Really good stuff. So something else I've been talking about, obviously, over the last couple days. I'm sure you saw online. Jimmy Butler misses the game a couple days ago. The Heat bring the fan down on the court. Jimmy gives him like a tour yesterday. That's cool and all. I feel good for that kid. I feel good for the family, but it doesn't make anything right, because the only way this whole situation, and I've been railing against the load management all year long. Unfortunately, it might be the biggest story in the league this year, which is really unfortunate. But the only way this situation is made right, Bobby, is if one of two things happen. Every time one of these players sits out, we're going to get every kid, every fan who came to see player X, and we're going to give them a personal experience. Or B, players stop sitting out games. Like, do you believe either of those scenarios are going to happen?
Well, it's interesting because I was in the car and I was listening to Brian Scalabrine and Frank Isola, and it looks like they might have got duped a little bit as far as this fan with I think they were in Golden State also. I think they might have had the same sign. I think that the issue of and Charles Barkley was on I think Sirius. The issue of load management is there's so many different ways we can go here. I mean, I think the league has to do a better job from a scheduling standpoint on back-to-backs. If an Eastern Conference team is going west for the first time and a Western Conference team is coming east, there's no reason why if Miami is playing Golden State and then they got to go play Sacramento on a second night and people want to go see Jimmy Butler, like I get it. It's hard with certain arenas here. I think we have to look at looking at the schedule being shorter, going 82 to 70 maybe. But then you have the factor in Philadelphia the other night in Sacramento sat Joel Embiid and James Harden not off a back-to-back, off a regular game, and didn't play again until last night against Brooklyn. So there's so many different factors here. The one thing I do want to give a little bit of pushback that Charles talked about is that all of a sudden the owners are going to come hammering away at this new CBA with the load management. When I started with the Nets, we had a trainer and we had a strength coach. All right. If a guy was hurt, he didn't play. Okay. We didn't manage, Kenny Anderson's at 40 minutes, man. He played 42 the night before. We got to rest him 2 days from now. A lot of this is team oriented, right? I mean, you look at these staffs now, the sports science staff is bigger than what basketball operations used to be in the 90s here. And so it's not like Jimmy Butler going to Spo or Andy saying like, "Hey, I need a night off." There are situations where there's sports science saying, "Hey, we're looking at the data here. There's a toll on Jimmy's knees right now. We're going to need to kind of relieve some of that here." So I don't think anything's going to. I mean, I'd be surprised if things get changed. I mean, I think maybe the only thing that really gets changed is maybe guys aren't eligible for certain awards based
Yep.
on games played. I mean, maybe that's the biggest thing here because if you're the Players Association, you're saying, wait a minute, is Jimmy Butler raising his hand saying I can't go tonight, or is it the Heat's medical staff saying, you know what, this is one of those games where we're going to need, whether it be a back-to-back or based on how this, maybe it's, I don't think we do 4 and 5 anymore, but based on how the schedule is, we're going to need to give this player a break. I mean, hey, it started in San Antonio, and it's been well documented. My big concern, and I think I'm looking at like a team like the Clippers, right? How is it fair if we get Kawhi Leonard and Paul George for 40 games, and then you get teams like Memphis and Denver? Denver didn't rest the guys the other night, but you guys playing the normal 70 to 75 games, and then these players are well rested when we get to mid-April. Like that's a concern for me, but there's no quick fix on kind of how to solve this.
Yeah, it's very frustrating. I gave pushback, of course, a couple days ago on Twitter about the Heat and Jimmy making it up to the fan. I'm like, I don't know, like I didn't make anything up, and the whole thing is because I'm pro fan in this spot. Like
Sure.
that's what it is. When I was a kid, my dad was able to afford to take me 1, maybe 2 Heat games a year. Now, players weren't sitting out back then, early 90s, the way they are now. But man, like if I go to the 1 or 2 games, I just want the fans to get the best experience. So it's frustrating to me.
The only thing you could say is that what's going to happen, and I hate to say this, is that fans, when the schedule comes out and the fans are interested in buying tickets, you have to be careful when there's back to backs.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really, and like I hate to say it, but that's kind of like there almost has to be a buyer beware sticker as far as how it goes.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the Heat here. They had a rough, really first third of the season, but it really seems like they're starting to look like the team that we expect them to be. They're a season best 5 games over right now. They're in the top 6. They're on the heels of number 5 Cleveland. Give me a little bit on what you've seen out of Bam Adebayo. He's making a case right now. He was very vocal about it a couple nights ago. He had a starring role there, especially in the fourth quarter against Boston. And after the game, he's like, listen, I need to be in Salt Lake City.
He should. I have him as a reserve. Unlikely he gets. The forwards in the East are. I mean, like he's going to probably make it as a reserve with Giannis or Embiid or Durant or Tatum. One of those guys. When that team, when they were struggling a little bit, he carried them. I felt. I thought he's elevated his game certainly offensively. I think he deserves to be a reserve. I think be interesting with Jimmy just based on games played. I think there's an argument to be made for him, and I think that's the coaches who are going to kind of take that into account. I think for Miami, they almost remind me of like a marathon runner, right? Like at mile 6, man, you're thinking, man, are they going to finish the race? Right. And then you get to mile 13 and guys start to get a little bit healthy and you start to figure it out. It's such a long year. I mean, I think that's just what it reminds us. It's such a long year. And I think the goal is, certainly to get in that top 6 where they are right now. I think Kyle is kind of who he is. I don't think we'll ever see the Kyle, Toronto Kyle. And I think we have to kind of accept that. But I think from a depth standpoint, when you have Gabe and Max and guys like that can, back him up and even Tyler at, some point, playing some point. I like where they are right now, considering where they were, 15, 20 games ago. Right now, the big question for me is, what happens in the next 2 weeks with the trade deadline? Can you get a little more size, right? Like that would be like, it'll give a little bit more, maybe we get away from putting Jimmy at the 4 sometimes. Maybe we get, certainly matchups here, but that's probably the big thing is for a little bit of from a size standpoint.
If they could find a taker for Lowry, obviously things are going better now than they were a month ago. But if they could find a taker for Lowry and get out of next year's $28 million. Would they do that by the deadline?
It's hard. I think, when you look at the situation with Kyle, this is a point guard driven league. You would basically probably go by committee, unless, I wrote in their trade guide, unless it's a team like Minnesota and D'Angelo Russell, for example, right? Like, who's on an expiring contract, and then maybe you get him at a little bit of a lower number going forward, and that gives you more flexibility to bring back Gabe and Max. I mean, who are going to be free agents here. I don't think you're at a pressing need. I don't think you're like, hey, we just got to get rid of this guy. But I think if there's certainly something out there that makes sense, then I think you're certainly looking at it, from his perspective. But, when you look at Mike Conley, D'Angelo Russell, Fred VanVleet, those are guys that we've kind of all talked about. There's a little bit of a point guard carousel that might happen in the next 2 weeks, or nothing might happen at all.
Who are some of the fours who could be available to them?
Well, the one guy I like is Jared Vanderbilt. I mean, I think, and he's kind of like a tweener five, he's limited, certainly offensively a little bit, but he's a guy that can give you 10 points and 8 rebounds, and 6 of them are offensive, right? He's on a really good contract. He's got a team. There's a team option for next year. Like Dwayne Dedman and him match up salary wise, right? It's going to cost you something else though, right? So what is it? Is it going to be your number one this year that you can move because you owe Oklahoma City a 2025? So are you comfortable moving a number one for, a guy that's he's not a star, right? But he's a guy that we'll be watching a first round playoff game and be like, man, like he just won us a game with 2 offensive rebounds at the end here. So like, that's a guy like that, I just because of where his salary is, it's hard with this roster though, because it's top heavy, right? When you look at Bam and you look at Jimmy and Kyle, Duncan's hurt. He's got that long contract. Tyler is off the board, certainly by how he's played and that poison pill restriction. You got like a lot of these guys on minimum contracts. You're 190,000 below the luxury tax. Eventually, you probably want to find a spot for Orlando Robbins to convert that, and that might not happen until mid to end of March here. So you're limited as far as from a contract standpoint as far as sending out money.
I want to ask you here about the Western Conference. I love the Western Conference this year. You look at the top 6 teams. I mean, nobody had it. Denver, Memphis, Sacramento, New Orleans, LA Clippers, and Dallas. I mean, I love what the Western Conference looks like. That's going to be a lot of fun when we get to the playoffs, right?
All you need is a good week to get you some separation. All you need to do is win 4 out of 5, whether it be Dallas or the Clippers. I think we might see a little bit of a run with the Clippers here, I think. But I mean, like you look at, from 1 to 13, 1 to 13 or 1 to 12, we have like Portland's not even in the, Portland, the Lakers, Oklahoma City, they're outside, I think, of the top 10 right now.
Yeah. 4 to 13 are separated by 3 in the loss column.
And that's where we come back. Now we come back to the rest. What happens now for the last 30 games here, the rest management part, right? Like time's eventually going to run out on some of these teams here. On the Lakers, Golden State had a really good win against Memphis, but you want to avoid, probably the play-in here, and that raises the next question: is like, I would love for teams like if it's Denver or Memphis to be rewarded for that top spot, and I want them to pick their opponent.
I've heard that before. Yeah,
I don't want like Denver to have to face Golden State in the first round. Hey, I want hey, if it's Portland, I want to play Portland, right?
I think MLB did that the bubble season. I think they were allowed to. Yeah,
they did, and I would. That would add a lot more to it. But the Western Conference is probably not. From an East, I like the East is strong, but from a Western, depth standpoint, it's really good.
Lastly, here, Bobby, what are you hearing about? Are there a couple of big names that you could see getting moved midseason?
Well, it's hard because most of the trades, I think the number is like 85% don't happen until the week of the trade deadline, and everyone's trying to figure out where they are in the standings here. Like, we've all circled Toronto, right? Mm-hmm. Toronto goes into Sacramento and blows them out. and Fred plays well and Pascal plays well. I think for the Raptors' sake, I think, they've got Gary Trent, who's got a player option, and Fred's got a player option here. Like, what's your comfort level as far as bringing them back? The Bulls are interesting. I mean, the Bulls are interesting just because of where they are fighting just to get in. They basically went all in with this roster. I don't think Zach Levine's probably in play. So what do you do? Vucevic, who's on an expiring contract, but it's not going to be. At least I don't think it's not going to be James Harden, Ben Simmons like we had last year. That kind of dominated New Cycle. Utah as a team fighting to get in. Clarkson, Beasley, Conley, Vanderbilt, Indiana, probably nothing with Turner. So some of these teams that we thought were going to be sellers aren't there yet. I think Charlotte, circle them. Rozier, Plumlee, Oubre. I don't think there's a taker out there for Gordon Hayward. I mean, that's a lot of money here. So, and the other thing that's hard is that I think we have 9 teams that control their first round picks. That's it.
Wow.
So you're limited as far as what, everyone went crazy when Rui Hachimura went for 3 first rounds, and everyone's saying, well, why couldn't they get a 1 for him? Nobody has them, right?
Right.
Nobody has 1s anymore.
Right.
So that's kind of the issue that you're running into a little bit right now, too.
Bobby, tell everybody what you got most recently on ESPN.com.
So we've got the 2 trade guides, the Eastern and Western Conference trade guide. We have an article that's in Brian Windhorst, Hoop Collective column, and a little bit on the extension rules that are hopefully going to get changed in this next CBA. We've got something next week on bonuses for some of these reserves, all-star bonuses here. And, just keep an eye on if there's a trade or a signing or anything transactional. We'll have something quick up on YouTube and on ESPN.com.
Awesome. Great job as always, Bobby. Always appreciate you spending time with us. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you.